Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there, to the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. Welcome. We are into December. We're just screaming into the end of this year of 2021. How's it going? Since we're sliding into the holidays, Jen Perry and I take some time in this episode to talk primarily around setting boundaries around the holidays. We also talk a little bit about claiming your joy and lowering the bar for expectations, getting clear on what it is that you really want to experience, and looking at, we've had to do a lot of adjusting these last couple of years with COVID, and how do we navigate some of those difficulties with family members. But the primary focus of this episode really is about boundaries and the discomfort that we may feel having to set a boundary, and it's easier for us to just adjust, and the fears that might come up. And I always love recording with Jen, so I think you're going to enjoy this episode. I'd like to give you some tangible tools and ways to navigate to make it much easier. I think that's it. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Hi, Patricia. I'm good, thanks. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm excited to have this conversation. What is something that you think is important that people can do around the holidays to make it a little easier?
Oh my goodness, the holidays. Even just saying that, I'm like, ugh. So much pressure. Yeah, so what can we do to take care of ourselves? It just kind of intensifies everything, right? So I think it's really important to take breaths, definitely keep all of your self-care, on point. It's funny because it becomes even more important when it seems like we don't have any time for it. I was having a great conversation about throwing a kids giving, and I was talking with my girlfriend about doing cooking. And then we really occurred to us that we were losing the point of the time that we want to spend with kids. So I think identifying like what it is you really want to experience, and then building your time, whether it's one dinner and actually that's one of the things I think is really important, is to chunk it down. Really chunk it down, lower the bar, chunk it down, give space for things to not go picture perfect. Yeah, there's actually a lot of things that we can do as HSPs to take care of ourselves through the holidays. So I'm happy to be here today talking to you about all the different, we'll take it in our own chunks, right?
Yeah, I know family can be a big trigger for people. Having to go visit family, being around family that doesn't understand who you are, the overstimulation, having people into your space, different family values, how to set boundaries. Do you have any thoughts about any of those things?
Well, boundaries is probably the top, right? One of the top things that we can do. And I know one of the most important things is to really be able to claim your boundaries as, your self-care, what you need. It might be helpful if we just talk about it like in specifics, right? So if you are away with family and you need some time apart, just letting that be known, I need to lay down or just go for a walk, or there should be times to take whatever space that you need to take. And the same thing if there's a whole house full of people. I think giving ourselves some time off as hostess, right? These are our family members. They may not get us, creating some space for that and taking the space we need. And one of the best ways that I like to do that is to separate the boundary, which we all need, from our emotions about the boundary and other people's emotions about the boundary, right? So I think everyone has all this pressure for all this like, oh, but that, needs to be picture perfect. Like, why are we, this sense of togetherness, you haven't seen family like all year. And then it's like, okay, be together and be happy about it. And just being able to say, okay, I see that you have some pretty strong emotions about me needing this time away. And, I'm sorry if that boundary disappoints you. The boundary is the boundary. The boundary is what you need to be a happy human. Separating out the emotions about the boundary and handling them separately. So here's my boundary. It's not up for negotiation. It's my boundary because we get to say what we need. Nobody else sets our boundaries for us. And then separately, okay, mom or aunt or daughter or whoever it is, now we can talk about your feelings about my boundary. It makes it so much easier.
Yeah. I think too that if you know that things are going to be different and you talk about that before the holiday, that way, if there are feelings or bumps that come up, they can be worked out and not be worked out on the holiday. I was just talking with a client recently who was talking about having family come and stay with them feels like it's too much. So they're having family stay separately from where they are. If you're traveling to go see family, that you don't always have to stay with your family, that you can stay somewhere separate or bring separate cars. That there are lots of ways that if we need an out, or if the family gathering is usually all day and that's too much for your nervous system, it's okay to set it for shorter, that all of these things are really okay. Because you want to be able to show up and appreciate and enjoy the holiday. And just because 12 hours works for everybody else doesn't mean that that's what's going to work for you and your nervous system.
Yes, exactly. Claiming those boundaries that you get to say what you need. And this is where that word unapologetically comes in pretty good too, right? Like we're not apologizing for the boundary. Like if we need to take separate cars or you need to stay in an Airbnb. So we're not apologizing for the boundary or the need for the boundary because that just is, right? I don't know. I have a hard time with apology, but we can speak to the disappointment that the other person is holding and empathize with that and still have the boundary be the boundary.
Mm-hmm. I think it also helps to start with the intention of saying, Jen, I want to talk to you about something. And the reason why I want to talk to you about this is because I want to enjoy the holiday. I want to have that connection and closeness. I find that it ends up being too much. And then I don't appreciate it. I don't enjoy it. I get irritable. I get tired. And I want to try and do things differently because I want to enjoy this time with you. And if I don't make this change, it keeps me from enjoying the time that I have with you. So the person may not feel as affronted that you're cutting out time with them, but you're doing it because you care about the relationship and you want to have a pleasant time, even if it's shorter or under different circumstances.
Yes, exactly. And if we can illuminate that, right? Shine the light on that, it's a very kind, thing to do to those family members that don't get us, that don't understand what our needs are.
Right. This can even come up around food, that if you have a certain way of eating and you're going somewhere where they don't honor, maybe you're a vegetarian or you have special dietary needs, sometimes you can bring some dishes to share so that you have what you need. That it's really about inclusion and trying to have connection with the people that you care about and not letting those differences keep you apart.
Yes. And that can be part of the intention, right? The intention setting.
I'm hearing a lot with people kind of being in COVID and isolation that they're feeling concerned about family get-togethers. And even that reintegrating and re-socializing can be stressful after people have been social distancing at home and not spending time with people. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Oh my goodness. Yes. COVID has been such an interesting time, especially for negotiating boundaries and allowing space for people's different comfort levels with COVID. We're all in it, but everybody's had different experiences and, different tolerance for risk. And I love being able to name things. And I think the more we're able to name things and share that, it's kind of like it has a snowball effect of making the people around us realize that it's not about them, right? It's just our process. And maybe even inviting them to even talk about or think about their process. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's just activation or overstimulation, right? I mean, here we have been holed up in quarantine for a long time and we are all kind of going back out. And sometimes it can be, depending on the different persuasions of family members, it may be a touchy subject about whether you're vaccinated or not. Actually, I'm just going to stand with it. I don't think it can be overstated how much separating out again the boundary and the need from the emotions that elicits, right? And dealing with them separately. I'm just thinking with COVID, it's so personal what we're willing to expose ourselves to. And it's really not about each other, but the negotiating, the please be honest with me about, what has your level of risk been? I'm not judging it. And you, like the spaciousness, you're allowed to make a different decision than I am, but the honest communication around what that has been, right? So that the comfort levels can really be there. If we set that as our bar, right? That it's not necessarily agreement, it's space and it's honest communication about COVID risks and exposures.
Right. I was just talking with someone yesterday. They have a 1-year-old baby. Their family is vaccinated, but the in-laws who live local invited them over, and they're not willing to expose their baby to potentially being exposed because their family is unvaccinated and they don't believe in the vaccination. And this isn't an argument pro or con vaccination, although you probably all know what my thoughts and feelings are about it. I support everybody in doing what they need to do to feel safe and to protect themselves and the people that they love. That's okay.
Yes, it's okay for there to be differences. And that's where the boundaries, okay, you make your choice and then I get to make my choice. And if we have big feelings about that, that's fine. We can talk about the big feelings and express them, but that it's separate from just an honest communication about the boundaries and what you're willing to do. And I think of boundaries sometimes as they can be really, really what I call gross, right? Like just a really, really big boundary. Like we're just not even going to talk about it and I'm not going to see you or something like that, right? Or we abandon our boundaries and I'm not even going to ask. I'm just going to not worry about it. And then, of course, a lot of times if we are worried about it, that just kind of sits inside our bodies, which isn't good. So those are kind of like really gross boundaries. And then there are more, if we can be brave about our boundaries and really work to grow our skill around our boundaries can become a little more subtle. They can become a little bit more like, okay, we're going to have an awkward conversation about this. I know you've been touchy about talking about vaccines, and I want you to know it's okay for you to have a different choice. But in order for me to stay in relationship with you and not just either betray myself by not even addressing it or just completely cut you out because I'm not brave enough to have the conversation with you. I'm trying to stay in relationship with you by having the conversation. I think if we can frame those conflicts as actually real bids to stay in connection, our boundaries can become a little more subtle, right? Maybe there will be more creative solutions, whether that's an outside gathering or a masked gathering, but at least everybody's being honest and there's enough space. Because again, back to what you said earlier so beautifully, like it is about meeting each other where we are and acceptance of all of the different, ways that we can be with family.
Right. I often find that most of us have wounding. So, and I think as HSPs, conflict is just not something that we like. We tend to be peacekeepers, and the thought of conflict and upsetting people or having to have other people have uncomfortable feelings, we don't like that. So it's easier for us to adjust to whatever we're uncomfortable with to not create external conflict because it's familiar and it's comfortable. And the risk is if I set a boundary with you, then you might have feelings that I can't manage. And I'd rather manage my own familiar, uncomfortable feelings than having to manage your uncomfortable feelings. And the people that usually have the biggest problem with our boundaries are the ones that are getting something out of it. And when we set a boundary and we're no longer allowing them to get something that we are not in a position that we want to give, we also need to recognize that. But I think that people get that physical dysregulation or the imagined dysregulation. If I set a boundary with you and I imagine that you're going to get angry or upset or you're going to yell at me, it's much easier for me to go like, never mind.
Yeah, no kidding. Exactly. That's the other side of that gross boundary, right? It's like, I'll eat this, right? I'll bury it somewhere in my body and not even bring it up.
Right.
I mean, we know that's not really good for us. And now we've missed an opportunity to be in closer connection, right? Because now the person that we're avoiding the conflict with is a wedge, right? They become more of a stranger, so to speak, because they don't know this about us. And when we get stuck up in our head about all of that, one metaphor I like to use that I think I don't know, it's kind of a funny metaphor. My clients crack up because not only do I make goofy metaphors, but then I mix them all up together. But I think of it as like tomato jars, right? So you have a boundary. A person has feelings about the boundary. Imagine that they've just picked up a tomato jar and smashed it at their feet. That's their tomato jar to clean up. Now, you can offer some assistance in cleaning up some of their tomato jar or not, but that helps me put some distance on it. Like that's really their emotional reaction is theirs. That's not our responsibility. So this funny visual of the tomato jar. helps me with that, including when I'm having my own tantrum about stuff because I'm not above that either. And I'm able to see that, wow, that's my own tomato jar that I just smashed. And sometimes we get a bunch of tomato jars smashed all around us. And of course, this goes both ways. But if we're honest, we want someone else to either clean up our mess, take care of how we're feeling, right? Which is not their job. And then the inverse is also true, that if it's their big emotion about it, it's not our job. Like we can empathize. We can be like, wow, yeah, I see you got a lot of tomato jar smashing going on there. Like you have a lot of feelings about this. And if we choose to, try to take some maybe comfort measures or some help around that tomato jar, but it does help me anyway to know that that's not truly my responsibility. They have choices in that moment. And having a tantrum about my boundaries, one of several available to them.
Yeah. And it's okay to talk about the discomfort that you have in setting boundaries. I'm really nervous to have this conversation with you. I want to connect. I want things to be better. I'm feeling afraid that it's going to create more conflict, that it's going to bring up big feelings. Those are also okay things to talk about when you want to set a boundary, obviously, depending on the person. I know many of you listeners have family members that are very toxic or narcissistic. Obviously, this is not going to work with those family members. So at least I'm making an assumption that the people in your lives that you may be able to communicate and negotiate. I mean, what are your thoughts, Jen?
It's so interesting because I definitely see where you're coming from. And then as you were talking, I was like, oh, but those are the ones we need it the most with. And I think that comes, kind of back to the self-care, back to especially when dealing with a toxic or a narcissistic family member, you really have to know in your bones that you have a right to this boundary. And just deeply know that. And sometimes that takes community, sometimes that takes support. It's hard to have that kind of strength, especially in a family of origin where those types of things were not supported. So, that's not something to be hard on ourselves about, but that reaching out and getting support so that we know we're entitled to these boundaries. I mean, I think it was lovely, the meta awareness that you were bringing, that it's okay to talk about, wow, this is really hard for me to have this conversation. You don't want a toxic family member to kind of take advantage of that weakness, so to speak, right? So I can kind of see it both ways. I think what you're getting at is you kind of state the boundary, but if your listeners are familiar with the gray rock method, right?
Right.
That's the boundary. And then you become as boring about it as possible and you don't fuel it at all with any kind of emotionality around it. Those types of nuances, I would encourage anyone to really reach out and get some support around. That's an extremely difficult situation. And I know as HSPs, that sense of over responsibility, somehow if we just did something different, this family member would not be so toxic. And that's an important thing to burst through, right? Again, that's not our tomato jar. That's not our behavior. That wasn't our choice. Yeah. My heart just definitely goes out to all of us that have to deal with some element of that. It's extremely difficult. It's not your fault. You deserve your boundaries and get support.
Right. And when we have wounding, we often go into over-explaining because we want people to get us. And we often have the ability to do this perspective shifting of seeing our perspective and the other person's perspective. And we think if we explain it enough, they'll understand. And oftentimes the people that we struggle with setting boundaries with only see things from their perspective. And so we get into this trap of over-explaining, and they don't have that ability to perspective shift. If you are a new listener to the podcast, I'll try and put it in the show notes, but I've done 4 episodes. 2 of them were with Amy Marlowe on narcissism and recovery from a narcissist, and 2 episodes with Dr. Lindsay Gibson on adult children of emotionally immature parents, and then how to identify a healthy relationship. Those might be helpful episodes to listen to.
Yes, those are great episodes.
So we just have maybe 5 or so more minutes left. Jen, what else is important to talk about? I'm wondering if we just want to focus primarily on boundaries for this episode, and then we can try and drop back in and do another episode with a little bit more. What do you think?
Yeah, boundaries, right? Definitely a big thing to get. It's funny, I was just thinking about our conversation today and about what I said a few minutes ago about really just knowing in your bones that you're entitled to that boundary. And, we have to be careful when we want someone to understand us and we do the over explaining. But again, we don't need someone else's permission for our boundaries. They don't have to approve, they don't have to agree, but they do need to honor it. Anyway, just another thought on that. Dealing with holiday stress. Yeah, we could definitely, continue talking about boundaries, but some other aspects in addition to self-care, is claiming your joy, centering yourself because you can't pour from an empty cup, right? Lowering the bar of expectations. Gosh, I wrote a newsletter article years ago on this one, a short story. I think it might have been the first year in a new house where I was hosting Thanksgiving. You can kind of imagine the scene, right? Like big table, big turkey, candles, like all the food's laid out. I think everyone had kind of just eaten maybe their first kind of round of bites of the meal. And the table broke very dramatically in like 3 points. It was like creak, pop, and then crash. So wine bottles, candles, everything kind of going into the center of the floor because it broke right in the middle.
Oh, goodness. Ugh.
And I had a young child at the time who just like started screeching. It was very dramatic. The metaphor there of, take all this picture perfect stuff and all of our expectations and then like let life happen to it.
Right.
And so lowering the bar, I think we all have that little, like the perfectionism and then the shame that comes right up behind the perfectionism. And if we can really meet life on life's terms. So, a broken table is one thing, but there's lots of things we can put in there, right? Like not being understood by certain family members or, oh gosh, help me think of examples, right? Like there's so many things that we can get really perfectionistic about.
I think the overstimulation, having the perfect dishes, having the perfect decorations, having your children behave, having it be a picture perfect moment, all of those things that, what if we wake up tired or crabby or we're overstimulated or we weren't able to get what we feel is the perfect gift? We lose the meaning. Just when we talked about the holidays, I just cringe because I just think of overstimulation. There's just too much of everything for my nervous system.
Oh my goodness, yes. And if you have a little HSC around, right, a little highly sensitive child, yeah, it can really be a recipe for disaster, right? For that overwhelm, for that definitely not meeting all those perfectionistic standards. And I think highly sensitive parenting, when we feel like our parenting is being evaluated, because as you know, if you're parenting a highly sensitive child, some of the things that you need to support your kid go wildly against what are sort of, the opinions that others may hold of modern parenting, right? And what should be done.
Right.
So that takes a lot of strength too, to be like, my parenting decisions aren't up for discussion. Those are, again, more back to boundaries, right? And this is where I think, again, community is so important to have that inner strength that you are allowed, if it's someone who has had children,
Mm-hmm.
Even just being able to say, you know what, you got to make your decisions with your kids, especially if they have adult children, you can go do it your way. And I'm not going to come and criticize you about that. And I need to do it my way. It's going to be pretty intense parenting in a fishbowl for the holidays.
Yeah.
Heart definitely goes out to all the parents out there.
Yeah. For our family, we, for the last few years, have just kept Thanksgiving to our immediate family. That we used to have extended family, and that's just too much for me. It's too much pressure. If you, again, are a new listener, I have an episode called I Lost My Shirt and It's Not About the Gravy, where I literally had a breakdown on Thanksgiving morning and said a word that rhymes with duck very loudly when all the children and adults here. It was bad. And there were so many things that were leading up to it. And it just helps me to see of what I need so that I can stay regulated and calm and be present for my family and not so into this stress of having to provide the perfect holiday. And if that means that it's just us as a family and I have peace and everybody else has peace and mommy isn't cursing in the kitchen, then it's all good.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, or maybe, I don't know, maybe we can make some space that, mommy can curse in the kitchen if she needs to. That's again, just like being human, because I think sometimes
Right.
our expectations of ourselves are just so unreasonable. We're not robots. We're not going to perform the same way all the time. Just being in tune with our cycles. We do get overwhelmed. We have low blood sugar. We get overstimulated. Yeah. Anything, it can all happen. Also, like stretching it out a little bit, like maybe having different celebrations throughout the holiday season. That for us over here with my family kind of starts on Halloween, really. This year, having a kids giving where it's, the kids' favorite foods and kids' activities, just making it work for you.
I love that.
Right. Especially in these times of COVID, like we've all had to adjust. And my hope, one of the outcomes of that would be that we, again, just know that we are definitely entitled to our boundaries and to be able to claim that joy in what our vision of the holidays can be. And to really get down to like what the core of it is. Like when I was talking, about what I wanted to experience and realizing that being in the kitchen all day wasn't going to give me that time with the kids.
I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. Last year we ordered a pre-cooked meal. It was terrible. And it's what we needed to do. And we ate outside on the back patio because COVID was just rampant and I was very fearful.
Yeah.
We do what we need to do and we let go of those expectations so that we can have that connection with the people that we love.
I mean, that's where the magic is, right? And if we get lost in the details, we miss it. I actually said in that conversation, like, look, now that I'm thinking about it, I want to play ping pong with my kids. Like, I don't even care if we order pizza. And I do want to honor that some people have very dear, food and that's a very meaningful part of the holiday. So I don't mean, again, to knock it if that's your thing, but I'd like to maybe take a piece of it, make sure I get some of my mom's, side dish or, to make a dear recipe without it necessarily having to be everything. Maybe we do order in the awful pre-made turkey or something.
Right. Well, we need to wrap up, but what I'm thinking is I think COVID has really given us an opportunity to rethink and reevaluate what used to be, quote, normal and, going back to normal. And do we want that? And was that working? And can we reinvent and recreate holidays and traditions that work for us and honor our needs and the people around us? And maybe it doesn't have to look like it's always looked. And maybe we'll create something that's even more special.
Yes. Cheers to that.
Yeah. Jen, thanks so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
All right. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Hey again. So what'd you think? Was that helpful? Did you get anxious thinking about setting boundaries? Did you feel empowered? It really can create a shift when we do decide what is important to us. What are we thinking, needing, feeling? And knowing that we have a right to take up space, to not have to live small, and to not worry so much about pleasing other people. And if we have kids or partners, it really is a way to model how we take care of ourselves. Much easier said than done. If this brought up some stuff for you and you need some support, you are welcome to reach out to either Jen or I. In the show notes, you can find Jen's contact information. You can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. If you're interested in the online HSP courses, registration will be opening up December 15th through December 29th. And the first class is going to start January 10th, I'm pretty sure, of 2022. Man, we're almost at 2022. Jen and I would love to support you in living your best life. We understand what it's like to be highly sensitive, to be a deep thinker, a creative, an overthinker, highly empathic. We would love to help you live your best life. I think that's it. I hope you are doing well. If you are thinking about the holidays, maybe you can do some writing about what is it that you want? What are areas that are uncomfortable for you? And you may not be ready or willing to set boundaries in all areas, but are there one or two areas where you can set some boundaries? Totally up to you. I think that's it. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.